I never thought my relationship would take such a strange turn. When I first met Bruno, he was charming, attentive, and honestly one of the most emotionally present men I'd dated. We had been together for about 6 months, and until recently, I thought everything was going pretty well between us. Sure, we had our differences, but nothing too dramatic. That changed the day he asked me if I'd consider getting a clit piercing. Yeah, a clit piercing. At first, I was so caught off guard I didn't even know how to respond. I laughed, thinking it was some dumb joke. But then I looked at his face. He was serious, completely serious. He even started describing what it would look like and how hot it would be. I remember blinking at him like, "Is this real?" I told him very clearly that it wasn't something I was interested in. I'm not judging people who have them. I'm sure it can be empowering or sexy or whatever for some, but for me? No thanks. It felt invasive, dangerous even, and definitely not something I'd do just to spice up someone else's fantasy. He said okay and dropped it. Or at least, I thought he did. I brushed it off and we moved on. But that moment left a weird taste in my mouth. It wasn't just the request. It was the way he looked at me while he said it, like I was a project he wanted to customize. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I thought maybe it was a one-time thing, a random idea he blurted out in the heat of the moment. Turns out, it wasn't. A few days passed, and I didn't think about it much, until he brought it up again. We had just finished having sex. I was lying there, still catching my breath, and out of nowhere he says, "You know what would make this even hotter? That clit piercing we talked about." I turned to him, confused, like, seriously? I reminded him I already said no, and he just kind of shrugged and said, "It'd look so good on you, though." That time, he didn't laugh. There was no hint of teasing or playing around. He meant it. I repeated myself. I told him I wasn't interested and that I had no plans of ever getting a needle anywhere near there. That should have been the end of it. But instead of respecting that, he exhaled sharply, like I was the one being difficult. Then he muttered something that made my skin crawl. "You're no fun. You know I have a thing for bad girls." I stared at him. What the hell does that even mean? He didn't really answer, just gave this half smirk like he'd said something profound. I was too tired to argue, so I got up and went to bed. He stayed on the couch playing on his phone and ended up leaving a little later to hang out at his buddy's place, which had become his new routine when I didn't vibe with his suggestions. It wasn't just about the piercing anymore. It was how casually he dismissed my feelings, how he made me feel like I was boring or uptight for setting a basic boundary. And every time he left like that, I felt a little smaller. A little more like I wasn't enough as I was. But I told myself he'd get over it, that it was just a phase or a weird fantasy he'd forget in a week. I was wrong. Weeks went by and the topic kept popping up like an unwanted notification. Sometimes it came as a joke. Other times he tried to sound playful, like, "Come on, imagine how sexy it'd be," or, "All the cool girls are doing it." Every time I said no. Every time he pretended to be fine with it. But I could feel his irritation building. One night we were watching TV when he brought it up again, completely out of the blue. I didn't even let him finish. I paused the show, looked him dead in the eye and said, "Bruno, I don't want a clit piercing. I'm not getting one, ever. Please drop it." He didn't argue, didn't yell. Instead, he just leaned back, crossed his arms and said, "You're not fun anymore." That one hit differently. I asked him what the hell that was supposed to mean. He looked at me like I was missing something obvious and said, "You used to be spontaneous. You knew I had this bad girl thing. You used to be open to trying stuff." I told him being spontaneous didn't mean doing things I was deeply uncomfortable with. And since when did I sign up to be someone's fetish mascot? He didn't respond. Just sat there, sulking, like a kid who didn't get the toy he wanted. I started listing my reasons again, how painful and risky the procedure could be, how important it was to have an expert, how I didn't feel safe letting his random friend do something so sensitive. He rolled his eyes at that last part and muttered something like, "He's not random. He's experienced." As if that made it better. By the end of the night, I felt like I was trying to justify my right to say no. And honestly, that scared me. I thought relationships were supposed to be about support and safety. But with him, saying no felt like a test I kept failing. And the worst part? I still kept hoping he'd finally stop. There was a shift in how Bruno acted after that night. He stopped bringing it up so often, but when he did, it came with this fake casualness, like he was trying to play it cool. "Hey, you ever change your mind about that piercing thing?" He'd say while sipping coffee, like he was asking about the weather. Each time, I'd give the same answer. No, still not happening. And each time, he'd give me that same disappointed face, like I'd let him down. Then came the moment that really messed with my head. He told me he'd talked to his friend, the one who supposedly did body piercings, and said he could book an appointment for me with a discount. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking again. But no. He actually pulled out his phone and showed me a message thread where they were discussing it. That's when I snapped a little. I asked him if he was even hearing me. I told him I didn't care how talented his friend was, or if the procedure was free, or if Beyoncé herself recommended it. I wasn't doing it. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't wrap his head around why I was being so dramatic. He actually said that. "It's just a piercing. What's the big deal?" I laid it out for him again. "This isn't a damn ear piercing. It's an extremely sensitive area of my body. If it gets infected, if it's done wrong, I could end up in serious pain or worse." I told him it wasn't just physical either. It was about consent, comfort, and respect. And yet, every time he brought it up, I felt like I was being coerced into turning my body into some kind of accessory to his kink. Still, instead of backing off, he just stared at me like I was the one being irrational. That night, I started to realize something painful. He didn't care about the reasons. He just wanted a version of me that fit his fantasy. And if I didn't comply, I was boring, unfun, a killjoy. But I stayed. I stayed because part of me hoped he'd finally hear me. It was supposed to be a chill night. Just me, Bruno, and a few close friends at a small get-together. Drinks, music, laughter. Everything felt light for once. I was finally starting to believe maybe things were back on track. Maybe he really had dropped it. Until he didn't. We were sitting in a circle, chatting and laughing, when he suddenly looked at me and said, loud and clear, "So, how about that clit piercing appointment?" The room fell silent. I froze, my drink halfway to my mouth. My friend Camilla blinked at me. Lucas looked between us like he wasn't sure if he'd heard correctly. And Bruno? He sat there smirking, like he'd just made the most casual, fun little comment ever. I couldn't even process it at first. I just stared at him. He stared back. And then something in me snapped. All the pressure, all the comments, all the times I said no, built up and exploded right there. I stood up. "Leave me the fuck alone about that," I said, loud and shaking. "You keep pushing and pushing for me to pierce my fucking vagina just because you've got some weird fetish. I told you no. I've always said no. And you bring it up in front of my friends?" He stood up too. "Why are you acting like this?" he snapped. "It was a joke. You didn't have to freak out." "A joke?" I shouted. "You've been asking for months. You keep trying to wear me down and now you want to humiliate me for saying no?" He started yelling back. Voices were raised. Someone tried to step in, but we were too far gone. It became a full-on screaming match, right there in front of everyone. Eventually, I grabbed my bag and stormed out with Camilla and Lucas behind me. I didn't look back. That night was the first time I truly saw the situation for what it was. This wasn't about a piercing. This was about power, control, and how little he respected my no. And yet, Even after all that, part of me still wondered if I overreacted. The day after the fight, I didn't hear from Bruno. Not a text, not a call, just silence. Honestly, I was relieved. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But then, a message from Lucas popped up. He wanted to check in, see how I was doing. I appreciated it, until he added, "Just so you know, I think you kinda went too far last night." I stared at my phone, confused. He continued, "I mean, yeah, Bruno was being weird, but exposing his fetish in front of everyone? That was a bit harsh." Harsh? I sat there trying to process what he was saying. I told him that Bruno had been pushing me for months, that I'd said no countless times, that I was humiliated and pushed into a corner. Lucas said, "Yeah, but guys have needs too, you know?" He probably just didn't know how to express it. My stomach dropped. So now it was about his needs? What about mine? What about the fact that I had to keep defending my right to control what happens to my body? I wasn't the one pushing him to do something painful, permanent, and intimate for my pleasure. Still, that tiny seed of doubt was planted. Was I too aggressive? Did I embarrass him unnecessarily? Should I have just handled it in private? But then I remembered the look on his face when he brought it up. The smugness. Like it was a joke only he found funny. Like my body was his toy to tinker with. And I remembered every eye in that room turning toward me. The heat crawling up my neck. The shame. I didn't lash out for no reason. I was defending myself after months of being cornered. Still, that comment from Lucas messed with my head more than I wanted to admit. It made me feel like maybe I was the one who took things too far. Like I should have just laughed it off and smiled through it all. But how long are you supposed to smile when someone keeps pushing you past your limit? A few days passed. I didn't hear from Bruno. I started thinking maybe he'd finally gotten the message. Maybe the public meltdown was the final nail in this whole mess. But then, late one night, he texted. It was short. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. An hour later, another message. "I'll let it go. The piercing thing. I swear. Just come home." I sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding. The way he phrased it, like I owed him something. Like my refusal had somehow caused all this. And now, if I just gave in a little, we could reset everything. I almost laughed. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor by finally dropping the subject he never should have brought up in the first place. I didn't reply. Then my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. By the fifth call, I answered. His voice was already breaking. "Please," he said. "I miss you. I messed up. I was just trying to spice things up. I didn't mean to pressure you." I stayed quiet. Then he started sobbing. I mean, full-on sobbing. Like gasp for air, broken animal sobbing. It was disturbing. He went from crying to yelling within seconds. "You always shut down my ideas. It's never what I want. Never." That's when he started listing everything else he was not allowed to do. How I didn't want to paint the kitchen white, how I refused to sell our old car, how I vetoed getting a dog because of my allergies. According to him, I was always ruining his plans, always saying no, always controlling everything. I just held the phone to my ear in silence, listening to him unravel. When he started screaming, I finally said, "We're done. This isn't just about a piercing. This is about how you treat me. I'm not coming back." He begged. He screamed. Then he started breaking things. I could hear the glass shattering in the background. That was the last thing I heard before I hung up. It wasn't just over. It was shattered. I stayed at my friend Camila's place that night. I didn't feel safe going back to my apartment, not after that phone call. She made up the guest bed, handed me a glass of wine, and told me to breathe. I tried, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The next morning, I woke up to a series of missed calls. Then a text. "I need to talk to you, now." I ignored it. Then came the banging. Camilla and I were in the kitchen when we heard it, heavy, aggressive pounding on her front door. We froze. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was him. He started yelling, "I know she's in there. Leticia, open the door. You're not going to run from this." Camilla peeked through the peephole and whispered, "It's him." She didn't open it. Instead, she used the door cam to talk to him. "Leticia isn't here, Bruno. Go home." He didn't buy it for a second. "You think I'm an idiot?" he shouted. "I know she's in there. Open this fucking door." Then the kicking started. Full force, relentless kicks against her front door while he screamed at the top of his lungs. "This isn't just about the damn piercing," he shouted. "It's about you always shutting me down. I'm tired of it. I want to say too. I wanted a white kitchen. I wanted a new car. I wanted a dog. And you say no to everything." It was like every single resentment he'd been holding in burst out all at once. Camilla called the police while I stood there frozen, my body numb, my heart racing like I was being hunted. I'd never seen this side of him. I didn't even recognize the person outside that door. Then, crack. He actually broke the frame. The door was still up, but barely. Camilla shouted through the door cam again, "The police are on their way." That stopped him. He backed off, breathing heavy, pacing on the porch like a caged animal. And when the sirens came into earshot, he ran. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't someone I could ever trust again. Not with my body. Not with my space. Not with anything. The police arrived minutes later. Camilla and I explained everything. His name, our history, what he'd done. They took pictures of the damage to her door, asked for the footage from the door camera, and filed a report. They were calm but serious, like they'd seen this 100 times before. I kept thinking, this is actually happening. My boyfriend, my ex now, just tried to break down a door to get to me because I said no to something he wanted. Later that evening, I got a call from the station. They had found him. He was being arrested for destruction of property and disturbing the peace. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel strong. I felt sick. Then came the final blow. As they were putting him in the patrol car, one of the officers said he yelled my name. "Leticia, you're such a bitch for ruining everything." That was the last message he ever gave me. Not an apology, not regret, just blame. Even in handcuffs, he thought I was the problem. Camilla decided to take him to small claims court for the damage to her door. She told me not to feel guilty. It was the right thing to do. And I knew she was right. But I still couldn't sleep for days. I kept replaying it all in my head. The way he looked at me when he made that first request. The way he'd twist every no into some kind of personal attack. The way he turned my boundaries into insults. But the worst part was how long it took me to realize it wasn't just about the piercing. It never was. It was about control, about wearing me down, about molding me into someone I wasn't. And when he couldn't do that, he broke. Literally. There's no more contact between us now. No messages, no calls, no apologies, just silence. And part of me is grateful for that silence, even though it still echoes louder than I expected. It's been a while since all of that went down, but the question still lingers in the back of my mind. Was I too harsh? I think about that night at the party, the way I yelled, the way I called out his fetish in front of everyone. I remember the silence, the looks, the way even my friends didn't know how to react. And I think about what Lucas said later, that I was mean, that I embarrassed Bruno, that I should have handled it in private. Maybe I could have. Maybe I should have. But how many times does someone get to push you before you're allowed to push back? I said no. Calmly, clearly, over and over. I explained my reasons. I tried to set boundaries. And every single time he dismissed them, joked about them, or ignored them. Until the night he decided to throw it all into the spotlight, in front of my friends, like I was supposed to laugh and say, "Sure, let's go get my clit pierced next week." He humiliated me first. And yeah, I snapped. I lost it. But I wasn't just reacting to that moment. I was reacting to months of being worn down, guilt-tripped, and treated like my body wasn't really mine unless it aligned with his fantasies. People keep saying, it was just a fetish. But even fetishes require consent, especially fetishes. I didn't mock him. I didn't shame him for what he liked. I shamed him for ignoring my boundaries and trying to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted, over and over again. And when I finally said enough, he exploded. I know I'm not perfect. Maybe I didn't handle everything the best way. But does that make me the asshole? So I'll ask you, honestly, from the outside looking in, was I the asshole for standing up for myself? For saying no? For finally telling the truth out loud?